She wasn't even on the invite list. Riley Greer had spent nearly a decade building Thornwell Solutions from the inside out, patching up deals at 3 a.m., calming clients who were ready to walk, and quietly saving projects before they exploded. And yet, there she was, standing in the doorway of the executive lounge, staring at a full-color poster taped to the glass. Leadership Vision 2030, meet the next chapter. 12 faces beamed back at her. Riley's wasn't one of them. But Nate Collins was. Nate, the junior, she'd trained the guy who once asked what an SLA was during a live client call, was right in the center, arms casually draped around Tessa Lang, the CFO, who never returned Riley's emails unless something was on fire. And judging by the balloons and champagne, inside, this was a party. A party for them, a celebration Riley wasn't supposed to see. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She just stood there, still watching people toast with glasses she helped film. And in that frozen moment, one thought hit harder than the rest. If they can erase me this easily, what else have they already taken? Before I walk you through how it all fell apart and why Riley didn't say a word until it was too late, I've got a quick question. Where are you tuning in from today? And more importantly, have you ever watched someone get rewarded for stealing what you built? Drop a comment below if this stirs something in you. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. For 9 years, Riley Greer was the quiet Axis Thornwell Solutions unknowingly spun around. She wasn't flashy, didn't fight for spotlight. While others pitched bold visions and buzzwords in meetings, Riley tracked operational faults no one else noticed, budget lines that didn't align, clients going cold before anyone saw it coming, compliance flags buried 3 clicks deep. She fixed things before they broke, and no one ever knew they were broken to begin with. When the CEO called her irreplaceable during last year's Q4 wrap-up, it wasn't in public. It was in passing, half a compliment and half a to-do as he walked out mid-call. Riley had smiled anyway. That was her job, to make everything look seamless, even when it never was. She was the one who restructured the onboarding process after a senior account manager got fired mid-cycle. She handled 2 simultaneous crises while HR was still trying to figure out how to schedule the exit interview. When the CTO's pitch deck crashed 10 minutes before an investor roundtable, Riley rebuilt it from memory, down to the transitions. No one asked how. They just said thanks, sometimes. Even new hires were told, if you're lost, ask Riley. She knows where the bones are buried. And she did, because she helped bury some of them. Riley never complained. Not when deadlines moved, not when others took credit, not even when she stayed late for the 3rd Friday in a row because someone else messed up time zones. She wasn't waiting for applause. She was keeping the company from collapsing under its own ego. But lately, something had shifted. Slack threads she used to start now continued without her. Meetings she'd created got moved without her name on the invite. And in the middle of all that silence, someone else was starting to speak in her voice. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was small, like a meeting rescheduled without notice. Riley had built the proposal deck, aligned the client schedule, even prepped the talking points for the team. But when the email came through with the updated invite, her name wasn't there. She told herself it was just an oversight. People get busy, calendars glitch, nothing worth raising an eyebrow over. Then it happened again, and again. Slack threads about key accounts, ones she'd personally negotiated, started without her. Nate, the guy who used to shadow her in onboarding sessions, was now looped in on things Riley used to handle solo. And worse, he'd started using her words, clumsily, out of context, but recognizable enough that it made her stomach turn. In a client call, she overheard him say, "Let's anchor trust before we escalate metrics," a line she coined. He butchered the delivery. After the call, the client pinged Riley privately. "Was that a new guy? We missed your clarity." She replied with a short, polite emoji, just enough to say, "I'm still here." But for how long? Documents she created began showing up with someone else's name in the metadata. Decks were forwarded without her CC'd. One morning, she opened the project tracker to find the access permissions had changed. Nate had owner rights now. Hers had been quietly downgraded to editor. No one told her why. No one looked her in the eye. And that was the part that stung more than anything. Not the erasure, but the silence. It's one thing to be replaced. It's another to be slowly ghosted in a place you helped build. And the worst part? She hadn't even begun to understand how far they'd already gone. Not yet. It was supposed to be a quick check-in. Riley had barely set her coffee down when Tessa Lang walked into her office, heels clicking sharp against the tile, phone in one hand, a printed agenda in the other. No hello, no smile. Just that practiced executive calm that always made Riley feel like she was already behind. "We're restructuring client ops," Tessa said flatly, "streamlining the forward-facing roles." Riley raised an eyebrow, meaning Tessa glanced at the window like searching for a softer way to deliver something sharp. We need fresh faces. The industry's changing fast, and, well, legacy personnel can unintentionally slow momentum. Legacy personnel. The phrase landed like gravel in her throat. Riley didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. Tessa was already moving on, flipping to a bullet point as if they were discussing office supplies. "Nate will be taking over primary contact for Tier 1 accounts," she added. "You'll shift focus to internal continuity support. Think of it as backbone work." Riley's hands stayed folded in her lap. Her voice, when it finally came, was calm. "So I'm not client-facing anymore?" Tessa gave a polished nod. "It's not a demotion, it's a realignment." A realignment. With no discussion, no warning, no acknowledgement of the 8 years Riley had spent holding the firm's biggest contracts together with invisible thread. Just a neatly packaged removal from everything she'd built. "Of course," Riley said, standing slowly, "backbones don't need a face." Tessa blinked, unsure whether that was a joke or a threat. But Riley was already moving, already turning away her coffee, still warm, untouched. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She just started walking back to her desk. And somewhere, buried beneath the calm, something cold began to take root. Riley didn't lash out. She didn't call a meeting. She didn't even vent to anyone. There was no one left to vent to. Instead, she opened a blank spreadsheet. The title was simple. Legacy Anchor, Do Not Touch. All caps, bolded, hidden from shared folders. She started with the oldest accounts, the ones she'd brought in back when Thornwell still ran client records on color-coded Excel tabs. Contracts with clause layers so thick they'd taken weeks to untangle. Accounts whose trust had been built not by presentations, but by 2 a.m. phone calls and real deliverables. Riley remembered each one by heart. For every client, she listed their dependencies, access codes, renewal dates, escalation protocols. But more importantly, she documented her fingerprints, clauses she'd quietly written amendments, tied to her credentials' back-end controls nobody else had bothered to review. Some of them were simple, executive override required for renewal, auto-launch. Others were buried deeper, wrapped in technical jargon only she fully understood. Strategic Continuity Index, RG21 certified. No one had ever asked what RG21 meant. It was her own internal code, a kind of signature. And now she was pulling the thread taut, not breaking anything, not yet, just mapping where the hinges were. The deeper she went, the more she realized how much she'd built that no one saw. Systems that Nate now used daily, blissfully unaware they only ran because she kept the lights on behind the wall. She didn't smile, didn't feel vindicated, just focused. Click by click, cell by cell, Riley laid the foundation for a structure no one else could control. And by the time she finished the file, sat quietly in her drive, locked, labeled, and invisible to everyone but her. The kind of file that doesn't look dangerous until it's too late. And just 3 days later, something happened in a client meeting that made her open it again. The message came in at 9:14 a.m. sharp. Subject: Client sync, logistics beta, go live timeline. Sender, Nate Collins. Tone, eager, confident, oblivious. Riley blinked twice at the subject line before opening the thread. The logistics client mentioned Farewell Freight was one of the most cautious firms on Thornwell's roster. She'd worked with them for years. Every change required 3 levels of approval and a full risk report. But according to Nate's email, he had already promised them an August launch for the real-time tracking beta. August. Riley sat back in her chair. The beta wasn't even ready for internal sandbox testing, let alone for live deployment with a Fortune 500 logistics partner. She opened the dev report to double-check. Still red flagged. Stability issues, data integrity at risk. The product team hadn't signed off on anything. She could have stepped in. One email would have fixed it. A phone call to the client, a quick apology. There's been a misunderstanding. Here's the revised timeline. But she didn't. Instead, she opened her legacy anchor file and scrolled to the Farewell row. There it was, a clause she had slipped in last year. Early feature adoption contingent upon strategic override and dual credential authorization. Without her credentials, the beta launch wasn't just invalid, it was contractually impossible, and Nate had no idea. That afternoon, she watched from her desk as he bounced between meetings, smiling, sipping iced coffee, telling anyone who'd listen that he'd secured the most aggressive rollout in Q3 history. Riley said nothing, didn't look up. But in the quiet, something shifted, because now the fuse was lit, and the first client to feel the blast was already asking questions. It started with one client, then 2, then 3. They didn't cancel, they didn't complain, they just went quiet. No reply to check-in emails, no confirmation on renewals, no responses in shared dashboards where there'd once been daily updates. The kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace, more like distance, something slipping through your fingers before you even know you're holding it. Riley noticed first. Of course she did. She saw the portal timestamps requests left unread, recurring tasks unchecked, contracts nearing expiration, and no movement. And yet no one else seemed alarmed. Nate was too busy planning his Q3 momentum presentation. Tessa was off-site networking with investors, and the operations team, they were still working off systems Riley herself had structured, unaware those systems were now quietly shifting under their feet. You see that silence? It wasn't random. It was calculated, because the legacy anchor file Riley built had teeth. Several high-value accounts were tied to credentials that had expired the moment her role was restructured. No one updated the access path. No one noticed the strategic continuity clause had a hidden dependency. No override, no reauth, no renewal. And Riley, she didn't remind anyone. She just sipped her lukewarm tea and watched the machine sputter, unaware that its gears were beginning to grind, without the one person who'd always kept them turning. One afternoon, a junior analyst walked by her desk and asked, "Hey Riley, do you know why the Fairwood contract hasn't processed?" She looked up slowly. "Oh, that one." She smiled, polite, distant. "I'm not client-facing anymore. You'll want to ask Nate." And as the analyst walked away scratching his head, another account quietly lapsed in the background. By Friday, the silence wasn't subtle anymore. It was echoing. And Riley? She was just getting started. The numbers didn't add up. By midweek, the finance team flagged a 7% dip in projected Q4 revenue. Quiet enough not to trigger alarms, but loud enough to draw whispers. They checked the usual culprits, market trends, vendor delays, internal forecasting errors, but nothing explained why 3 high-value accounts had suddenly stalled without a trace. Tessa called it a short-term misalignment. Nate said probably just a blip. But behind closed doors, the language changed. Something's off. Too many variables missing. Anyone heard from Fairwood? Riley sat at her desk, watching the Slack channels shift tone. The emojis disappeared. The updates slowed. Threads, once full of momentum, now ended with looping in Nate for visibility. Still waiting on client confirmation. Not sure who owns this workflow now. And Nate, he was still strutting through the halls with his iced vanilla latte, flashing peace signs and half-memorized buzzwords. He posted a selfie in the lounge with the caption, "Crushing Q3 with the Dream Team." That same day, 2 accounts went dark. Riley didn't say a word. She just adjusted her screen brightness and double-checked the clauses she'd planted months ago, triggers designed to expire quietly if credentials weren't verified on schedule. Everything was unfolding exactly as she'd mapped it. By Thursday, a junior from compliance walked into Tessa's office looking pale. "Hey, we have a renewal that technically violated our own process, and it's not just one." Tessa waved her off. "Just follow the new protocols." "There aren't any," the junior replied. "At least, not ones that work anymore." And just like that, the questions began to swirl. Who made this change? Why wasn't it flagged? Who even built this process? But no one said Riley's name, because the truth was too inconvenient. And the next morning, something else failed, this time in front of a client. The door slammed open without warning. Tessa stormed into Riley's office like a woman halfway through a fire blazer, unbuttoned phone in one hand, a folder clutched in the other. Her lipstick was smudged, her voice an octave too high. "We've got 2 renewals stuck in compliance, Halbridge and Stratton, both frozen. No system flags, no approval path, just locked." She threw the folder onto Riley's desk. "Fix it." Riley didn't flinch. She didn't even look up right away, just calmly finished typing her sentence, saved the file, and turned her chair with the ease of someone who knew this moment had been coming. "Sounds like a clause mismatch," she said, voice even. Tessa's eyes narrowed. "Don't play coy. Legal says the credential path loops back to a discontinued access point, one that was linked to you." Riley gave the faintest smile. "Then I guess someone should have updated the Strategic Continuity Index." Tessa froze, blinking. "The what?" "The index," Riley repeated softly. "You know the one tied to accounts that I personally managed? You were copied on the appendix when I submitted it, last fiscal." Tessa's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Riley stood slowly, hands loose at her sides. "You reassigned the face of client operations," she said, tone light but razor sharp. "But you never bothered to ask who held the keys underneath. This isn't funny, Riley. We need those deals processed today. Halbridge is already threatening to walk." "Then I suggest you call Nate," Riley replied, stepping aside. "He's the fresh face, right? Maybe he can find a way around locked access and legal firewalls by end of day." For a second, the only sound was the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Tessa stared at her like she was seeing Riley for the first time, not as an employee, but as a problem, a wall. And in that silence, a new ping popped on Riley's screen, an internal escalation from the CEO's office. The meeting room was packed by 8:15 a.m. No coffee, no agenda, just a silent row of senior execs trying not to look nervous. The CEO stood at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, face pale like he'd been awake all night. His voice, when it came, was quiet. Too quiet. 4 accounts frozen, 2 in breach territory. 1 client already threatening litigation. No one spoke. He looked around the room, eyes scanning faces like he didn't quite believe any of them were real. Nobody here knows what happened. Nobody here knows how it got this far. And no one, he paused, tapping the table with 2 fingers, can explain who removed the contractual fail-safes from the Q3 stack. At the far end, Nate cleared his throat. "We assumed they were outdated." "You assumed," the CEO snapped. "Those clauses were legally binding. They were tied to investor projections we disclosed last quarter." Tessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her phone vibrated on the table unanswered. The CEO ran a hand through his hair, then looked toward the door. "Where's Riley Greer?" Silence. Someone muttered, "She's internal-facing now." "Bring her in," he said. Now. But Riley didn't come. She had already seen the meeting on her calendar, 7 a.m. No subject line marked urgent. She knew exactly what it meant. Instead of rushing to the room, she sent one email. No greeting, no signature, just a subject line, contractual continuity failsafe review change history, and a single line in the body. Check, deal ID 447B, Appendix C. Timestamp, last edited 2 weeks ago. She hit send, closed her laptop, and waited. Down the hall, voices rose. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. Another cursed under their breath. The sound of everything unraveling, not loudly, but all at once. And at exactly 8:27 a.m., her desk phone rang. She didn't answer. Because some collapses don't need explosions. They just need gravity. And hers was still pulling. Riley didn't leave in a storm. No slammed doors, no dramatic speeches, no HR confrontation. Just quiet, methodical motion, the kind that comes from someone who's already let go, long before anyone else noticed. She arrived earlier than usual that morning. The office was still half asleep, monitors dark, coffee machines warming up, and the hum of startup silence hanging in the air. She wore her usual black slacks and navy blouse, no makeup, no expression. At 7:32 a.m., she zipped one file, just one, legacy_continuity rg.zip. In the notes field, she typed a single line, anchors hold, until they don't. She uploaded it to the legal drive. No alerts, no announcements. It looked like any other routine compliance update, except this one held the final thread connecting Thornwell's client systems to the woman they'd quietly erased. Then Riley wiped her local access, disabled the credentials tied to the Strategic Continuity Index, closed every sync, archived her inbox, and walked to the intern desk at HR badge in hand. "Hey," she said, gently handing it over. "You'll want to deactivate this. Thanks." The intern blinked. Are you leaving?" Riley just smiled. "I already have." She passed by Tessa's empty office, passed by Nate mid-call, gesturing at his screen, not even realizing the client portal behind him had just timed out. In the elevator, Riley took one last look at the 14th floor. The screen above the doors flashed red unnoticed, system flags, expired renewal keys, integration errors starting to surface. Alarms weren't ringing yet, but they would. Because when she stepped outside, that's when Thornwell truly began to fall. And inside the chaos she left behind, someone finally opened that zip file. What they found would change everything. They never really saw her, not until it was too late. The day after Riley walked out, Thornwell systems began unraveling like a sweater pulled from the hem. Client access failed silently. Renewals that used to auto-trigger just stopped. Nate spent an entire morning refreshing a dashboard that wouldn't load, blaming IT. Tessa called 3 meetings in a row, none of which explained why a quarter of their Tier 1 accounts had gone radio silent. By noon, the CEO issued an internal statement, one that finally said Riley's name out loud. "Her contributions were more critical than we realized," he wrote. "We're working to restore continuity and regain trust." But she was already gone. Riley didn't stay to watch it collapse. She didn't return the calls, didn't reply to the legal team's follow-ups, didn't engage when old colleagues pinged her on LinkedIn, suddenly remembering how great she was to work with. She was out, completely, and for the first time in nearly a decade, at peace. You see, Riley wasn't just another employee. She was the root system beneath the company's polished image, the one holding everything steady while others posed for the spotlight. And they thought they could replace her with a fresher face. But a tree without roots doesn't fall loudly, it just rots, quietly, until the whole thing tits. The lesson? It's easy to overlook someone when their work makes your life easier, but the people you forget to thank are often the ones holding the ceiling up. So here's a question for you. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in the room? Tell your story in the comments. Someone else might need to know they're not alone.